Hello and welcome back to Cold Blood Files. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the darkest, most disturbing true stories we uncover each week. A lottery ticket, a happy family, and an 8-year-old boy who never came home. What would you do if you suddenly won the biggest lottery in the country? Celebrate? Laugh with your loved ones? Share the joy publicly through the media? But what you can't see is the stranger quietly reading that news. In his mind, a plan is forming, not to congratulate you, but to destroy you. Today, we dive into one of the most haunting criminal cases in Australian history, the kidnapping and murder of 8-year-old Graeme Thorne, simply because his parents won the lottery. A disgusting scheme. A killer with a gentleman's face. And a price far too high for a moment of public joy. This isn't just a high-profile crime, it's a wake-up call about how fame, without caution, can become bait for evil. Watch until the very end, because the Graeme Thorne case didn't just shatter a family, it forever changed how an entire nation understood safety in a modern world. Graeme Thorne was an 8-year-old boy living with his parents in the affluent suburb of Bondi, Sydney, Australia. As the only child in a modest, loving family, his life was filled with school days, laughter, and the safety of a warm home. But everything changed in June 1960 when his parents, Basil and Frida Thorne, won the Opera House lottery, an enormous prize worth £100,000 at the time, the equivalent of millions today. The media exploded with headlines. Photos of the Thorne family smiling with their lucky ticket filled the front pages. Reporters didn't just share their names, they printed their address and intimate details of their lives. In a time before privacy laws or personal security awareness, this exposure would soon prove fatal. Within days, a stranger, completely unknown to the family, spotted young Graeme as the key to getting a piece of their fortune. He didn't rob a bank. He didn't hack an account. He planned to kidnap a child. On the morning of July 7, 1960, Graeme got ready for school like any other day. He waited outside for the usual car, driven by a trusted neighbor, that took him to class each morning. But this time, the familiar car didn't arrive. Instead, a strange man pulled up and stepped out. With a calm voice, he told the boy, "Your mother asked me to take you to school today." Trusting and unsuspecting, Graeme got in. From that moment on, he was in the hands of a killer. When Graeme Thorne stepped into that unfamiliar car that morning, he had no idea the man before him wasn't a friend of his mother, but a predator. His name was Stephen Leslie Bradley, a foreign-born man who had lived in Australia for years. He had a wife, a child, and a murky past. Bradley had been silently tracking the Thorne family for days. The media had handed him every detail he needed, where they lived, their son's name, what time he left for school, and how he got there. They were careless. They let the whole country know they'd won. And the boy? Still walking to the curb like nothing had changed. Bradley's chilling confession during police interviews. Bradley had no steady job. He was in debt and survived by scamming and dodging responsibility. But this time, he aimed higher, pound 25,000 from the Thorne family's lottery winnings. Enough to escape his failures and start over. He planned meticulously, rented a car, brought bed sheets in case things went badly, and chose a secluded house as a temporary holding place. At first, Bradley claimed he only wanted to hold Graeme for ransom. He'd collect the money, release the boy, and disappear. But he didn't expect Graeme to be so brave, or so loud. The boy kept asking, "Who are you? Where's my mom? Why are we going this way?" Bradley recounted. He started screaming, kicking. I panicked. I just needed him to be quiet. In that panic, Bradley struck the child in the head with a heavy object. Graeme lost consciousness. Then Bradley, overwhelmed, unthinking, strangled the boy until he went completely still. I didn't mean to kill him. I swear. I lost control. He just wouldn't stop screaming. His trembling voice on tape. Once the child was dead, Bradley showed no signs of remorse. Calmly, he wrapped the body in bed sheets, placed it inside a laundry bag, and hid it in the trunk of his car. He then made a single ransom call to the Thorne family, pretending Graeme was still alive. But afterward, he never contacted them again. If you want the boy back alive, have £25,000 ready. I'll call again. The caller's voice was cold and deliberate. That second call never came. The Thorne family waited in despair, hoping for a miracle. But what they didn't know was that, from the very beginning, this kidnapping had already become a murder. When Graeme vanished, it was as if a lightning bolt struck Australia's collective heart. Within hours of the ransom call, Sydney police launched one of the country's largest ever search operations. The Thorne family clung to hope. They stayed quiet, waiting for that second call. But it never came. And as days passed, hope began to rot into despair. A week later, a local in Seaforth discovered a blood-stained bedsheet in the bushes, with blonde hair tangled in the fabric. Forensics confirmed it was human blood, and the hair matched Graeme's. Not far from that, concealed in the underbrush, they found a coarse laundry bag. Inside was the decomposing body of a small boy wrapped in a blanket. When Frida Thorne saw the evidence, she collapsed, crying. "Oh God, that's my boy, that's Graeme." Autopsy results revealed the boy had been struck on the head and died by strangulation. Experts estimated he had been killed within hours of being abducted, meaning the ransom call was just a cruel facade. Though Graeme was gone, his body told investigators everything. Dog hair on the blanket suggested the killer had a pet. Rare algae on the laundry bag pointed to specific coastal regions. Strong gasoline scent on the fabric hinted the body had been transported in an old vehicle. One blurred piece of receipt paper in the bag led to a corner store in Longueville, an area where Stephen Bradley had recently lived. Locals near the crime scene described a suspicious foreign man seen frequenting the area. One person recalled a strange license plate, while another remembered Bradley's dog, and that he disappeared with his family days earlier. Police searched his old apartment and found identical bed sheets to the ones wrapping the corpse. Dog hair matching the crime scene samples. Receipts matching the torn paper in the laundry bag. Every clue pointed in one direction. Stephen Leslie Bradley, a seemingly charming man with a deadly secret. He was gone. He had fled. And now began one of the largest international manhunts in Australia's history. As the mounting evidence pointed clearly towards Stephen Leslie Bradley, New South Wales police issued an international warrant for his arrest. But when they arrived at his Longueville apartment, it was deserted. Bradley hadn't just fled, he had planned it meticulously. Soon after Graeme's body was discovered, authorities learned that Bradley, his wife, and their son had boarded a ship, heading to Sri Lanka, and then continued on to London. This wasn't a panicked escape. It was a calculated exodus. Bradley had changed passports, altered identities, and used false addresses to cover his trail. He believed the world was wide enough to hide in. But he underestimated Australia's relentless pursuit of justice, driven by the grief of a nation mourning a murdered child. For weeks, investigators traced him from Colombo to London. Then a breakthrough: Bradley was spotted in Hungary, his homeland. The catch? Hungary had no extradition treaty with Australia, making the situation legally complex. An international manhunt turned into a diplomatic standoff. Australian officials traveled to Budapest, engaging in tense negotiations while Hungarian media began reporting the fugitive's presence. In a small cafe in Budapest, Hungarian police swooped in and arrested Bradley without resistance. His only words: "I knew this day would come, just not this soon." Catching the man was one thing. Getting him back to face trial was another. With no legal extradition agreement, Australian diplomats spent months providing evidence, guaranteeing fair trial standards, and navigating diplomatic sensitivities. Eventually, under growing international pressure and compelling proof, Hungary agreed to expel Bradley. In March 1961, nearly 2 years after Graeme's death, Stephen Bradley was flown back to Sydney under heavy guard. To the Australian public, his return was not just about justice. It was the face of evil brought back to answer for a nation's collective sorrow. When Stephen Bradley was returned to Australia, Sydney was on edge. Crowds gathered around the courthouse, and the media covered every second. People weren't just waiting for a trial, they were waiting for justice for Graeme Thorne. In 1962, prosecutors laid out Bradley's chilling plot using irrefutable evidence, blankets matching those from his home, fiber and hair analysis, and witness accounts of a strange car that morning. The judge declared, "This was more than a crime, it was a betrayal of a child's trust." Bradley maintained a cold expression throughout. He claimed the death was accidental during what was intended to be a kidnapping for ransom. But the jury wasn't convinced. After weeks of tense proceedings, the jury found Stephen Bradley guilty of first-degree murder. The judge delivered the sentence. "Stephen Leslie Bradley, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of an innocent child, driven by greed." Bradley showed no emotion. But outside the courtroom, a quiet wave of applause rose, not for celebration, but for a measure of justice finally delivered. The case didn't end with Bradley's imprisonment. It sparked major legal reforms in Australia. New privacy protections were introduced for lottery winners, and media regulations were tightened. Above all, Graeme Thorne's name became a tragic symbol and a cautionary tale, a reminder that the innocence of children must be protected, and that evil can lurk even in the glow of fortune. Graeme Thorne, an 8-year-old boy who should have lived a life full of joy and innocence. But his fate was stolen, not by chance, but by the unrelenting greed of a man who saw a child as collateral. He wasn't the son of a millionaire. He was just a boy, born at a moment when luck struck his family. Graeme's death shook Australia to its core. It reminded everyone that sometimes, a single envious gaze can unravel an entire life. No one truly knows what Graeme endured in those final hours. But one thing is certain, he deserved life, protection, and love. From his quiet funeral to the final court ruling, the entire nation stood behind a child who could no longer speak for himself. His name became a symbol of innocence, trust, and the fragile beauty of childhood that must be fiercely protected. This case was more than a murder. It was a brutal wake-up call. A reminder to protect our privacy, to stay vigilant, and to never ignore the subtle dangers that often hide behind familiar faces. If you're a parent, teach your children caution. If you're an observer, never look away from suspicious behavior. Sometimes, the smallest act of attention can save a life. Thank you for staying with us until the end. This wasn't just a crime, it was a mirror held up to society. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Not to sensationalize tragedy, but to spark awareness, empathy, and vigilance. Stay mindful. Because evil is never as far as we hope.